So nice to see you. I hope everyone is doing well. So as I mentioned, we're going to be discussing time in the next 6 classes. And did you know that time is the most commonly used noun in the English language according to the Oxford English Dictionary? In fact, time is number 1, year is number 2, and day is number 4. So out of the top 4, time in some form or other is the most used construct in our English language. And so that just goes to show that we spend a lot of time and effort thinking about time, talking about time, and probably dreaming about time. So I remember that before the pandemic, in my office, people used to always say, I don't have enough time. There's not enough time in the day. Where did the time go? Time flies. And it was just this construct that was causing a tremendous amount of anxiety. Of course, now we have quite the opposite situation where people seem to have an abundance of time. And so I hear quite often, I'm so bored. I have nothing to do. I have too much time. What am I going to do? I don't know what to do with all this time. So it's quite clear that time is a very important construct in terms of our well-being. And that's why I decided to really look at it and investigate it from different angles. And certainly in our meditation practice, we talk a lot about being in the present moment. So what does that really mean? So we're going to look at time in the next 6 classes with a reference to mindfulness. And if we think about time, there are many different ways to use the word, right? There can be high times or low times, a stitch in time, lost time, crunch time, high time. There's just a lot of different times. But today, we're going to talk about intellectual time. And really what that means is the time that's measured by clocks and watches and calendars in terms of minutes and hours and days and years. And it's definitely our most available of all the concepts of time. And in the next class, we'll look at biological time or physiological time, like how our body tells time, basically through our circadian rhythm and diurnal and nocturnal clocks. So that will be interesting. And then in the 3rd class, we'll talk about emotional time. So humans are the only animal species on the planet that actually can move backwards and forwards in time at will. So how we deal with that ability can really cause happiness or anxiety depending on our vision for it. So that's the 3rd class. And then in the ensuing final classes, we'll talk about it from a scientific perspective. I took a toe dip into quantum physics. So really, I am not an expert in any of these fields. So that's the caveat here. We're looking at things at a very high level. But again, it's through the lens of mindfulness. And I think you'll find it fascinating. I know I have enjoyed researching it. So let's talk about intellectual time. So it really is about the chronological passage of time. As I said, minutes, days, hours, and we tell time through watches and clocks, and it's our most steady and quantifiable experience of time. And so a little bit about the history of the measurement of time. Ancient Egypt actually used sundials or shadow clocks about 1500 BC. That's the way they told time. And then, in the ensuing years, we used candle clocks. So as the candle wore down and the wax melted, that was one way to tell time. Incense was another way. And of course, the hourglass was one as well. In the Middle Ages, bell towers used to tell the time. So they would ring the bells at noon, and you can, all over Europe, they still do that. But the problem with that was that it was different from town to town. So one town 5 miles away would have a very different sense of what noon was. And that became a problem when train travel became ubiquitous, because really we didn't know or people didn't know when the train would arrive and when it would depart, since it was different in every town. So at that point, it was about the late 1880s, Greenwich Mean Time, or Standard Time, was invented. And that became the norm for travel and, across Europe. In fact, it wasn't actually adopted in America until 1918, not very long ago. But of course, now we have atomic clocks, and they are able to tell time within the region of 1 second of 100 million years. That's how accurate they are. So a lot has changed in 102 years. So these devices have really been wonderful and wonderfully beneficial, and really revolutionized our lives, because we kind of live by them now, being our most accessible concept of time. And the ones we have the most, we seemingly have the most control, but it's not really clear that we even really understand time. So what is clear is that we often measure our happiness or well-being around those rigid measurements. We make plans that require a meeting at a certain time, a project to launch on a certain time, and as a project manager, that was literally 50% of my job. I had to build very detailed project plans, identifying every single task, its duration, when it would launch, what would happen if something was late, then identify that gap. So I spent a lot of time measuring time. But we also use it to mark things like anniversaries, our 30th year on the planet, and our 15th wedding anniversary. So, these frameworks allow us to set expectations and have a common understanding around those expectations, and work towards that point in time. So if we assume something will take a certain amount of time, and then it actually does, then we're quite happy. And so if my project launched on time, I was certainly happy, and I was very happy to communicate that to my stakeholders, and they were happy. If my significant other arrived for the date on time, that also made me happy. If I drove to work and I arrived there in 5 minutes quicker than I thought, that also made me happy. But of course, the inverse is also true. So if our expectations are not met, then we're quite unhappy. If the project didn't launch on time, I would have a very difficult time having to go in and tell all those senior stakeholders what went wrong, why it went wrong, and why I set the wrong expectations. And if we wait 10 seconds for a page to load on my computer, I know that drives me crazy. Or if a waiter brings our meal whenever we can go out, or used to go out 20 minutes late, we get very, very upset. So the idea is, can we understand and normalize these expectations around time, so that we don't get caught up in these reactive states of mind? And mindfulness, of course, is the tool that we can use. And, in this modern world, our lives are incredibly sped up. I mean, really, when you think about cars and planes and computers, everything is moving very, very quickly. And actually, with quantum computing, things are going to get even faster. So it's more important than ever to reset our expectations. And it really makes me think about the statement I made in the last class from Mo Gaudat about how he had an equation for happiness, which actually I'm going to change to well-being, because I'm not a fan of the word happiness. But your well-being, he said, is equal to the current situation of your life minus your expectations around it. And so this is as true with time as it is just in the general sense of things. So if your experience is that things are taking too long or moving too slowly, we get frustrated and angry. And he suggests, and I agree, that we need to examine and realign our thought processes around the construct of time and our expectations. And in so doing, transform our experience into a more realistic mindset. And, we can't really control time, but as we've said many times, we can control our attitudes towards it. And mindfulness, sure enough, is one of those ways we can take control. And we can change the framework and have a healthier expectation for ourselves and for others, achieving a sense of balance and equanimity, and thereby well-being. So again, coming into that present moment, using that sense of awareness is one of those ways. And I often think that there's a parallel between time and water. Just the way David Foster Wallace called his speech, "This is water." It's a very precious resource that we seem to take for granted. Our default setting is to be completely oblivious to its richness and vastness and importance in our lives. So I think wasting time is a lot like watering someone else's garden, or in the case of my sprinklers, the sidewalk. And so making time, designing the time to enhance your life, making time to sit, to come into this present moment, cultivating that sense of awareness, is really what I would call watering your own garden. And the idea is, if you outsource your time and energy, because that's what time really is, just energy, so that you're very busy all the time, or you're looking at social media all the time, or watching television, the idea is you're not watering your own garden. You're not cultivating that inner life that is a richness that you can bring about through how you spend your time. So if you prefer to use your time to come inside, to cultivate that awareness, that is like watering your garden. That is bringing the plant inside you alive. And as we know, life is about balance. So it's not about, making sure you sit for 40 minutes one day and then you don't sit for the next 2 weeks. How about you sit just a little bit every day, just the way we water our gardens, right? We don't flood it for one day and then not water it for a couple of weeks. So it's that repetition, that constant, slow balance and repetition that allows this cultivation of a richness of the garden of your inner self. And so the idea is, can you take the time to cultivate your own well-being? Use your time to your best event. Design your own time. It's a really lovely concept. And dedicate that to your own well-being, knowing really you are the most important investment of your time. And when you have that richness and abundance in you, then it's so much easier to share. And so you can engineer your joy and your strength and your wisdom just through that taking time for yourself. And then if you feel like you're lacking, then maybe you aren't watering that garden. Maybe you're giving that time and attention and energy to something that's not bringing back abundance to yourself. So it's very important to be conscious of your time. It is a precious resource. It's not going to be here forever. We know that, right? I mean, we're going down a journey, and the sands of time are moving forward. So the thing is, if for some reason, let's say you haven't been able to be consistent with your practice in the last couple of weeks or the last couple of months or even the last couple of years, it's okay, right? That past is gone. We can't get it back, but we can start anew. And just the way when we sit, if our mind wanders, we just come back to the present moment. We can do that again and again with our practice. Just setting aside that time to cultivate our inner abundance, our inner sense of joy. It really is a gift that we give ourselves. It's the garden that we can cultivate. So that's where mindfulness comes in, and we can focus on the present moment and worry less about those expectations of their being met, how fast or slow something is happening. And then, have a healthier perspective on our life, knowing we can cultivate that abundance in our inner world, in our gardens. And that's totally within our construct if we design our time correctly. And so recognizing that the events in themselves don't make us unhappy or happy. It's really how we choose to look at those events and choose to make the best use of our time. And it's really quite simple. It's not that hard, but it is something that requires that consistent awareness that we cultivate in our practice. So let me leave you with a quote from Jorge Luis Borges. He says, "So plant your own gardens and decorate your own soul instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers." So again, just think about that time as a precious gift you give yourself in the sitting and in the awareness and in the cultivation of that awareness that you bring to yourself and then can share with others that enriches your life. So thank you so much.